Hello everyone, have a nice evening. Enjoy a good ghost story with the gentle sound of rain from BLACKRIDGE Stories, and sleep well. If you find these stories interesting, please subscribe and comment for me. Thank you very much everyone, and now, without making you wait any longer, let's go to part one of the story. Echoes of the Father, the haunted house in Tucson. The house stood quietly at the edge of Tucson's historic district, nestled beneath the swaying branches of a centuries-old mesquite tree. Its adobe walls had faded with time, cracked and worn by decades of scorching sun and monsoon rains. To most passers-by, it looked like a forgotten relic of Arizona's past, but to those who knew better, it was more than just a house. It was a place where time refused to move on, and neither did he. In the early 1900s, the house was built by the Deluna family, a modest but proud household led by patriarch Emilio Deluna, a respected craftsman and devout Catholic. He lived there with his wife and 2 children. Emilio was known for his devotion to his family and his meticulous care for the home he built with his own hands. But his life came to a sudden and violent end one stormy summer night. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but rumors in the neighborhood whispered of something darker. A scream in the middle of the night, lights flickering wildly, and the sound of something crashing to the ground just before his wife found him lying at the bottom of the stairs. After his death, the Deluna family moved away. The house sat empty for years until it was bought by a young couple from Phoenix, Melissa and Andrew Park. They had fallen in love with the home's vintage charm, eager to restore it to its former glory. What they didn't know was that the house had never truly been vacated. The first night in the home was quiet, but the second brought strange noises, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Melissa thought it was just the house settling, but as the days passed, the disturbances escalated. Lights would flicker without explanation, especially in the stairwell where Emilio had died. Doors opened and closed on their own, even when the windows were shut tight. One morning, Melissa found the front door wide open, though it had been locked before bedtime. Andrew installed security cameras, determined to catch the source of the strange activity. What they captured sent chills down their spines. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every night without fail, a light would turn on in the living room. Then came the soft creaking of the hallway floorboards, the sound of slow, heavy steps descending the staircase. But no one ever appeared on camera, just the sounds, and the light turning on by itself. Melissa became increasingly disturbed. She would hear someone whisper her name when she was alone. Mirrors began to fog up with no moisture in the air, and once, she found the word "stay" written in the condensation. They consulted a local historian, who revealed the house's past and Emilio's tragic death. She also told them of the stories passed down over the years, of how Emilio had been overly protective, sometimes violently so, fearing anyone who might take his family or home from him. Desperate for answers, the Parks invited a spiritual medium to visit. As soon as the woman stepped inside, she froze. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's still here. He doesn't know he's gone." During the seance, the medium attempted to reach Emilio. The room grew cold, and the lights flickered violently. Then came the heavy sound of footsteps, slow, measured, as if someone were pacing in the upstairs hallway. A picture frame fell from a wall and shattered on the floor. The medium gasped. "He thinks you're intruders," she whispered. "He's confused and angry." That night, Melissa woke to find her bedroom door ajar, though she had locked it. The air was freezing. As she sat up, she saw the faint outline of a man at the foot of the bed, just standing, watching. His face was shadowed, but she could make out an old-fashioned work shirt, the kind worn by craftsmen in the early 1900s. She screamed, and the figure vanished. They decided to leave the next day, but when they tried, their car wouldn't start. The garage door refused to open. Their phones lost signal. Melissa ran inside to grab something, and the front door slammed shut behind her, locking Andrew out. Through the window, he could see her yelling, but no sound came through. Inside, Melissa was running through the house, doors slamming around her, lights turning on and off. Finally, the front door burst open, and she came out, shaking. She said she had seen Emilio at the top of the stairs, pointing at her, his mouth open in a silent scream. They left that night, abandoning most of their belongings. The house has sat empty since. Neighbors still report lights flickering on and off in the dead of night. Some claim to see a man standing in the upstairs window, watching silently. Real estate agents have tried to sell the home, but every prospective buyer walks away after visiting. No one wants to live there. No one dares to stay. It is said that Emilio still walks the halls of his beloved home, unable to understand why strangers keep coming and going. In his mind, he's still protecting his family, still maintaining the house he built with his own hands. The world may have moved on, but he never did. So if you ever find yourself near Tucson, and you come across a weathered adobe house with boarded windows and the heavy silence around it, walk away. Because in that house, a father's love turned into something much darker, and he's still waiting at the top of the stairs. Let's get to part 2 of the story, Whispers Through the Red Stone, the haunting of Monument Valley. The sun had just begun to set behind the towering mesas and buttes of Monument Valley, casting long shadows across the crimson desert floor. For most travelers, the view was awe-inspiring, a sacred, timeless landscape steeped in history and silence. But for some, that silence was deceptive. It held voices, whispers carried on the wind, voices not of the living. Tourists and locals alike have spoken in hushed tones about what happens when night descends over this ancient land. Monument Valley, once home to generations of native tribes, was a place of deep spiritual significance, but it also bore the scars of war, conflict, and sorrow. Blood had soaked the red earth during violent clashes between tribal factions, and later, during the westward expansion of settlers. It is said that the souls of warriors who died defending their land never left. Ethan Blake, a nature photographer and amateur historian, arrived in Monument Valley with the hope of capturing the golden hour light cascading over the buttes. He had rented a small, remote cabin at the edge of the valley, away from the usual tourist trails. A Navajo elder who handed him the keys had looked him in the eye and simply said, "If you hear drums after sundown, don't answer." Ethan had chuckled awkwardly, thinking it was just local folklore. That night, Ethan reviewed his photos under the flickering light of an old lantern. The temperature had dropped quickly, and the desert wind had picked up, rattling the cabin windows. He poured himself a cup of coffee when suddenly a sound pricked the silence, distant drumming, faint, rhythmic, and deliberate. It wasn't music. It was ceremonial. He stepped outside, camera slung over his shoulder, and peered into the dark. The desert stretched endlessly, bathed in pale moonlight. Nothing moved, and yet the drums continued, slowly growing louder. Then came the whispering, soft, indecipherable words carried on the breeze. Ethan called out, but the only reply was the howl of the wind. Determined to investigate, he hiked toward the sound, flashlight in hand. As he crossed a narrow canyon, he noticed the air had become unnaturally still. The wind had stopped, so had the insects. A strange chill settled over his shoulders, and the flashlight began to flicker. He raised his camera instinctively and snapped a photo. The flash illuminated a lone figure standing atop a nearby rock, draped in tattered ceremonial garments. The figure wore a painted mask, one half white, the other red, and held a spear in one hand. Ethan blinked. The figure was gone. Chilled to the bone, Ethan rushed back to his cabin. As he reviewed the photos on his laptop, his breath caught. There in the image was the masked figure, standing perfectly still and staring directly at the lens. His eyes were not human. Unable to sleep, Ethan kept his camera close as the hours crawled past. Just after 3 a.m., the drumming returned, but this time accompanied by chanting low, guttural voices in a language long forgotten. Outside the cabin, shadows moved. Shapes of warriors walked silently across the sand, translucent and shimmering like heat mirages. Some held spears. Others bowed their heads as if in mourning. Then the whispers came again, louder this time. "You do not belong here." Ethan staggered back. The door burst open with a loud slam, and the fire in the lantern extinguished. Pitch darkness. The only light came from his laptop screen, which now displayed a message in white text, as if typed by an invisible hand. You walked into sacred ground. Blood remembers. Terrified, Ethan grabbed his keys and camera, bolting from the cabin. But the landscape had changed. The familiar road was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of red sand and jagged rock. The mesas loomed taller, as if watching him. The stars above twisted in unnatural constellations. In the distance, a circle of ghostly warriors had formed, chanting and moving in unison. Ethan stood frozen as one of them pointed toward him, the others slowly turning to face him. Their eyes glowed faintly, filled not with malice, but sorrow, the sorrow of being forgotten. Suddenly, the wind returned, fierce and loud, howling like 1,000 voices. Sand whipped around him, blinding him momentarily. When it cleared, the warriors were gone. The road had returned. Dawn was breaking over the valley. Ethan fled Monument Valley that morning, vowing never to return, but the experience haunted him. Weeks later, back home in Arizona, he uploaded the images he had taken to his computer. Most were typical desert landscapes, until he reached the final photo. It was an image of the cabin door, but scrawled in the dust was a message in Navajo script. He had it translated. It read, "Tell them we are still here." Ethan never published the photos. Instead, he gave them to the tribal elders, along with a handwritten note saying, "I heard them. I believe you." To this day, those who camp near Monument Valley after dark report sudden drops in temperature, unexplained drumbeats, and shadows that don't belong to the living. Some say they dream of masked warriors standing at the edge of their bed, silently watching. Others never speak of what they saw. One thing is certain: the spirits of Monument Valley remember, and they are still waiting. Let's get to part 3 of the story: the ghost of the Gypsy girl in Casa Grande, Arizona, a quiet town resting between Phoenix and Tucson, best known for its historic ruins and desert charm. But hidden beneath its sun-bleached streets and small-town warmth lies a darker memory, a mystery that, even a century later, still whispers through the night air. It's the story of a girl in white, who vanished without a trace in the 1920s and who, many claim, never truly left. Her name was Elena Marquez. She was 17, the daughter of a railroad worker and a seamstress. By all accounts, she was quiet, polite, and fond of taking evening walks just before sunset, when the desert breeze was at its gentlest. People often saw her strolling near the cotton fields, the hem of her white dress brushing against dry earth, her long hair tied back with a ribbon. Then, one summer evening in 1923, Elena didn't return home. Her mother waited by the door with a lantern. Her father scoured the nearby roads and alleyways, calling her name until his voice gave out. The town came together to search: neighbors, ranchers, even the sheriff, but no one found any sign of her. There were no screams heard, no signs of struggle. It was as if she had simply disappeared. Days turned to weeks. Rumors spread that she had run away, that a traveler had taken her, that something darker had happened in the fields where she walked. But her body was never found. The Marquez family eventually moved away, broken by grief. Years passed. The town grew. New homes were built. Roads were paved. But something strange began to happen near the old cotton fields, especially along a narrow dirt road on the outskirts of Casa Grande, the road Elena used to walk. Drivers reported seeing a girl in a white dress standing by the roadside at night, her face pale in the moonlight. Some said she was walking, barefoot and silent. Others claimed she appeared out of nowhere, directly in front of their cars, causing them to swerve in panic, only to find no one there when they stopped. A truck driver in the 1970s described how his radio went dead, headlights dimmed, and the temperature in his cab dropped suddenly as he passed the fields. Then he saw her, standing just off the road, looking directly at him. He blinked, and she vanished. In the 1990s, a couple driving home from a late dinner spotted what they thought was a teenager walking alone along the edge of the road. They slowed down, rolled down the window to offer help, and the girl turned toward them. Her eyes were dark, empty, her face expressionless. The woman in the passenger seat screamed. The girl faded before their eyes like mist. More recently, paranormal investigators visited the area. They brought EMF detectors, thermal cameras, audio recorders. One night during a full moon, their equipment picked up a sudden spike in activity right near the spot where Elena was last seen. One team member claimed to hear faint sobbing through his headphones, followed by a girl's voice whispering a single word: "Lost." What makes this haunting especially chilling is how specific and consistent the sightings are. Witnesses always describe the same girl: white dress, long dark hair, expressionless face, sometimes reaching out a hand as if asking for help. Some even reported their cars stalling for no reason near the same patch of road. One story comes from a teenager named Lucas, who was dared by friends to walk the stretch of road alone at midnight, armed with only his phone flashlight. He walked until he reached the spot near the cotton fields. The air, he said, grew inexplicably cold. Then he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned, no one. But when he turned forward again, he froze. There she was, 10 feet in front of him, pale, silent, her eyes locked with his. She raised her arms slowly, pointing back the way he came. He ran, faster than he ever had in his life. His friends found him minutes later, gasping for breath, pale as a ghost himself. "I'll never go back there," he said. "She didn't want me there." Local historians believe the girl's restless spirit remains because her disappearance was never resolved. No justice, no closure, no final resting place. Some speculate she was murdered and buried somewhere in those fields. Others say her soul is simply lost, repeating her final walk over and over, searching for a home that no longer exists. There are those who believe Elena is not malevolent. She doesn't attack. She doesn't scream. She watches. She mourns. Perhaps she doesn't know she's dead. Or maybe she's waiting for someone to find her. Locals now avoid the road after sunset. Some even say the land itself feels wrong, like it doesn't belong to this world. The few who dare to drive through at night do so with headlights high and doors locked. Some leave small offerings on the roadside, flowers, rosaries, even letters, hoping to comfort the spirit of a girl taken too soon. And so, in Casa Grande, the legend of Elena lives on. If you ever find yourself driving through the desert night, and you see a lone figure on the roadside, a girl in white, hair gently blowing in the breeze, slow down, but don't stop. Whatever you do, don't meet her eyes, because once you do, you may never forget them. Let's get to part 4 of the story, the silent watchman of Fort Apache. Nestled deep in the White Mountains of eastern Arizona lies Fort Apache, a historic military outpost once bustling with soldiers, officers, and the echoes of battle. Built in the 1870s, it played a central role during the Indian Wars and was once home to the legendary Apache Scouts. Today, Fort Apache stands as a museum and cultural site, a tribute to the past. But if the stories are to be believed, not everyone is left. For decades, visitors, caretakers, and even park rangers have reported strange occurrences on the grounds. Cold drafts through sealed rooms, footsteps echoing down empty hallways, the distinct sound of gunfire in the dead of night, and above all, the figure of a lone soldier wandering the grounds as if still on duty. Locals call him the Silent Watchman. He is most often seen near the officers' quarters or standing at attention near the now empty guard posts. Always in uniform, a Civil War-era blue jacket, brass buttons gleaming in the moonlight, his posture rigid, back straight. He never speaks. He never moves unless no one is looking. But many claim to feel his gaze, heavy and solemn, as if he's watching over a post long forgotten by time. One of the earliest modern sightings occurred in 1965, when a schoolteacher named Margaret Ellis, who had taken a summer job cataloging artifacts at the site, stayed late one evening. As she walked to her car, she heard the sharp click-clack of military boots behind her on the stone path. Thinking it was one of the staff, she turned to say goodnight, but no one was there. Then, just as she reached her car, she saw him reflected in her side mirror, a tall soldier, expression grim, standing motionless several yards behind her. When she turned to face him directly, he was gone. Stories like hers began to stack up. A maintenance worker reported seeing lights flickering in the barracks long after they were closed for restoration. He entered to find chairs pulled away from tables, old documents scattered, as if someone had been reviewing tactical maps. Another time, a pair of tourists reported hearing battle commands being shouted from a building marked off-limits. When staff checked, the building was locked and had been for weeks. Paranormal investigators have visited Fort Apache numerous times. In one overnight study, cameras caught a blurry figure moving through a locked corridor, despite no one being present. Audio recorders picked up whispers and an unmistakable single gunshot at 3:11 a.m., echoing through the still night. No weapons were on the premises, but the most chilling account comes from Ranger Samuel Drew, who had worked at Fort Apache for over 10 years. One autumn night, while conducting a routine perimeter check, he spotted what he thought was a reenactor in full uniform. The man stood still, back straight, eyes forward. Curious and mildly annoyed that someone was wandering around after hours, Drew approached, but as he got within a few feet, the figure turned to him, and the ranger could see straight through his eyes, into the black, empty space beyond. Then, the man vanished into thin air. "I've worked in the Park Service for decades," Drew later said in a radio interview, voice shaking. "I've dealt with bears, floods, even wildfires, but nothing prepared me for that." Locals believe the Silent Watchman is a composite of several spirits, soldiers who died in battle or from disease, their oaths still binding them to protect the fort. Others believe it is a single soul, perhaps an officer who lost his men in combat and chose to stay, eternally guarding the place where he failed them. Fort Apache, after all, saw real bloodshed. Skirmishes with the Apache, outbreaks of illness, and accidents claimed many lives. And though military records were kept, not all names were honored or remembered. Some say the spirit wanders not just to guard, but to be acknowledged. There's also a legend tied to a particular oak tree at the northern edge of the fort, a tree said to be a place of execution during the fort's darkest days. Some have reported seeing a shadow hanging from a branch in moonlight, swaying without wind. The watchman, they say, sometimes appears beneath that tree, head bowed, mourning the past or guarding against its repetition. People who stay overnight in the fort's restored buildings often report vivid dreams. Dreams of battles, of marching, of waiting endlessly under the sun for orders that never come. One guest woke in the middle of the night to the sound of pacing just outside their door. The next morning, dusty boot prints led in a straight line across the porch, even though it had rained just before sunrise and no reenactors had been on site. Despite the eerie encounters, most witnesses described the spirit not as threatening, but sorrowful, dutiful, anchored, as if whatever tied him to Fort Apache was a vow he couldn't break, even in death. Today, the White Mountain Apache tribe oversees Fort Apache, preserving its history and culture. They honor both their ancestors and the soldiers who once walked its grounds. While the official tours focus on historical facts and cultural restoration, many guides quietly acknowledge the ghost stories, especially when tourists ask about the man in blue. One guide puts it this way: sometimes history doesn't end, it just waits. And here at Fort Apache, some spirits are still waiting for peace, for recognition, or maybe just for someone to remember they were here. So, if you ever visit Fort Apache and feel the hairs rise on your neck, or hear the sound of boots behind you when you're sure you're alone, don't be afraid. Just stop, stand tall, and salute, because the Silent Watchman might still be on patrol. Let's move on to part 5 of the story, the Whispering Lights of Sedona. Sedona, Arizona, known for its towering red rock formations, mystical vortexes, and breathtaking desert sunsets, has long drawn not only spiritual seekers and artists, but also those chasing the unexplained. Behind its postcard-perfect beauty lies a different reputation, that of a hotspot for mysterious lights, otherworldly sightings, and whispers of spirits that never left. Locals call them the Whispering Lights. For decades, strange lights have been reported dancing across the skies of Sedona, shimmering orbs that flicker and vanish, beams of bluish light shooting across canyons, and glowing spheres that hover without sound. These aren't just modern drone mistakes or camera tricks. Stories of these lights go back centuries, embedded in the oral traditions of Native American tribes who lived in the region long before Sedona became a tourist haven. To the Yavapai and Apache peoples, the land was sacred, a living, breathing place where the spiritual and physical worlds intersected. They spoke of lights in the sky as the ancestors returning, guiding or warning those who ventured too far. These lights were never to be followed. To do so meant risking your soul. One of the earliest recorded encounters by settlers dates back to the 1880s. A rancher named Thomas Whitaker reported seeing floating lanterns above Boynton Canyon. The lights moved in patterns, circling each other, then rising sharply and disappearing. His cattle refused to cross the canyon for days afterward, lowing anxiously as night fell. Over time, stories multiplied. Campers near Cathedral Rock described columns of white light shooting into the sky without a source. Hikers reported orbs hovering just above the desert floor, close enough to touch, only to vanish the moment they stepped near. One man swore a red orb followed him along a trail for nearly a mile, pulsing like a heartbeat. Perhaps the most chilling story comes from a woman named Emily Hart, a landscape photographer from Colorado. In 1998, while shooting the full moon from a ledge overlooking Bell Rock, she saw what she thought was the second moon rising. Confused, she turned her camera to capture it, and the light began to move. Smoothly, deliberately, silently. As she looked through her lens, she saw something else, figures, translucent shapes standing beneath the light, unmoving, watching. When she lowered the camera, they were gone, but the light remained, pulsating. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it blinked out. Emily left Sedona the next morning and never returned. Many believe these lights are connected to spiritual vortexes, places in Sedona where energy is said to spiral upward or inward, affecting consciousness. While scientists dispute the notion of vortexes, the locals and countless visitors describe intense physical sensations in these areas: dizziness, clarity, even visions. Some spiritualists believe the lights are manifestations of ancient spirits, guardians of the land, revealing themselves to those who are open. Others, especially modern paranormal investigators, suspect something more interstellar, UFOs. And indeed, Sedona ranks high among the top UFO sighting locations in the U.S. One famous case involved a retired Air Force pilot named James Fulton, who moved to Sedona in 2003. In a written account, he described witnessing a formation of 5 glowing lights moving in perfect synchronization across the night sky, faster than any aircraft he'd ever seen. They hovered, shifted, then streaked upward at impossible speed. "I know aircraft," he wrote. "These weren't ours." Skeptics argue that Sedona's unusual geology, rich in quartz and iron, might interact with the atmosphere to produce visual phenomena. Others blame optical illusions caused by extreme temperature shifts in the desert air. But such explanations rarely satisfy those who have seen the lights with their own eyes. Some witnesses even report hearing voices when the lights appear, soft whispers carried by the wind, unintelligible yet oddly soothing. One woman claimed the voices felt like memories I didn't know I had. Another man said the lights filled him with an overwhelming sense of loss, as if remembering a home he'd never lived in. There's a particularly eerie tale about a group of college students camping near Red Rock Crossing in 2007. Around midnight, they spotted a cluster of lights hovering above the treetops. Intrigued, they tried to approach, but found themselves inexplicably turned around, walking in circles for hours. When they finally returned to their campsite, their watches were off by 3 hours. All of them reported having the same dream that night, being underground, surrounded by stone walls etched with unfamiliar symbols, as a low hum vibrated through their chests. To this day, no one can explain what happened. Despite the eerie nature of the stories, the lights of Sedona aren't usually considered malevolent. They're unsettling, yes, mysterious, unpredictable, but they inspire more awe than fear. Some say they're warnings. Others believe they're invitations to explore something beyond our understanding. Tour groups now operate UFO tours, driving visitors into the desert with night vision goggles and laser pointers, hoping to glimpse the strange phenomena. Sometimes the lights cooperate, sometimes they don't. But whether they appear or not, the stories continue to grow, passed from traveler to traveler, etched into blogs, whispered in cafes, and recounted beside campfires. One native elder, when asked what he believed the lights were, simply replied, "They're not for us to understand, only to respect." So if you find yourself beneath Sedona's starlit sky, surrounded by silence and the towering silhouettes of red rock cathedrals, watch closely. A glimmer might appear in the distance, flickering, floating, shifting like a thought just out of reach. But take heed. If the light begins to follow you, or whispers fill the air, do not follow them back. Not all journeys return to where they began. Let's move on to part 6 of the story. The Cursed Grave of Prescott, Arizona, with its charming Victorian homes and old Western spirit, holds more secrets than its sunny days and pine-scented air might suggest. Beneath the surface of this historic town lies a tale of sorrow, fear, and a graveyard that locals dare not speak of after dark. At the edge of the city stands Evergreen Cemetery, one of Arizona's oldest resting places, dating back to the 1800s. It holds the remains of miners, cowboys, soldiers, and settlers who braved the frontier. But deep within its oldest quarter, a weedy, neglected corner shrouded by overgrown pines, is a single grave marked only by a worn stone, cracked and half-buried. The name is barely legible, but the legend is clear. They call it the Cursed Grave. For more than a century, stories have circulated about the strange things that happen near this grave. People who linger too long hear sounds with no source, a soft weeping, as if a child were crying into the night, whispers just behind their shoulders, and footsteps crunching dry leaves, even when they're alone. Some say it began with Amos Blackwell, a drifter who arrived in Prescott in 1877. According to old court records and local gossip, Amos was accused of murdering a young woman, Mary Lynn Carpenter, whose body was found near the creek. She had been strangled, and her locket was missing. Though there was no proof, townsfolk were convinced Amos was guilty. He was dragged from his makeshift shack, beaten, and hanged without trial under a pine tree on the cemetery's edge. His body was buried in secret, not in honor, but to be forgotten. A small, unmarked grave was dug at night. No priest spoke a prayer. No stone was placed at first. Only a crude wooden plank with the words, "Let him rot." That's when the strange events began. A week later, the undertaker who buried Amos fell ill with a fever no doctor could explain. He raved about a man with hollow eyes watching from the trees, and died by the end of the month. Then came the disappearance of a gravekeeper who'd been seen near the site just before dusk. His lantern was found flickering by the Blackwell grave, but he was never seen again. The town grew quiet about the site. Over the decades, people avoided that corner. It became overrun with weeds and bramble, as if the land itself wanted it hidden. The old plank was eventually replaced by a stone marker in the 1920s, but time has nearly erased the name. In 1952, a group of teenage boys dared one another to sleep beside the grave on Halloween night. Only 2 returned. The third boy, Mark Pelton, was found at dawn unconscious, eyes wide open, face frozen in terror. He never spoke again. His family moved away the next year. Some call it superstition. Others say the earth remembers injustice, and it screams in silence. Paranormal investigators have since tried to explore the site. In 1988, a researcher named Helen Rourke brought recording equipment into the cemetery after sundown. She captured what sounded like a single gasp, followed by soft sobbing and a voice whispering, "Not me, not me." The audio was studied, but no logical explanation could be found. Helen returned the next week, hoping to dig deeper, but was found wandering the cemetery hours later, barefoot and disoriented, clutching a rusted locket she swore had been pushed into her hand by an unseen force. Locals now say the curse is not simply about one grave, it spreads. Shadows linger too long in that part of the cemetery. Lights flicker along the path leading to it, One visitor described feeling a pressure in the chest, like something pressing down from the inside. Others say they were drawn to the grave, only realizing later that they'd walked there without intending to. But perhaps the most unsettling account comes from Julia Mercado, a woman who moved to Prescott in 2016 and started volunteering as a cemetery tour guide. She had never believed in ghosts, considering them stories for tourists. One evening, while preparing a twilight tour, she paused near the cursed grave to read its marker. Behind her, she heard crying, unmistakably a man's voice, raw and broken. Thinking someone was playing a prank, she turned quickly. No one was there. She stepped back. The crying stopped. Then, just as she was about to walk away, she heard 3 whispered words, so close she felt the breath on her neck. "I was framed." She hasn't returned to the cemetery since. Some believe Amos Blackwell was innocent. A later discovery of a rusted locket in an abandoned home far from the crime scene cast doubt on his guilt. But the town never cleared his name, and perhaps that's why he lingers, bound not by evil, but by injustice. Every town has its shadows. Prescotts may walk, cry, and whisper through the pines. So if you ever visit Evergreen Cemetery, stay on the marked paths. Don't wander past the iron gate that guards the old quarter. And if you hear weeping, don't turn around. Some souls don't rest because they weren't allowed to, and others don't rest because they were never heard. Let's get to part 7 of the story. The haunted miners of Jerome, perched on the steep slopes of Cleopatra Hill, the once booming mining town of Jerome, Arizona, sits like a forgotten relic of the past. Known in its heyday as the wickedest town in the West, Jerome was built on copper, silver, and gold, and the backs of thousands of miners who toiled deep beneath the surface. Today, the mines are silent, but the dead are not. Visitors to Jerome often remark on the town's eerie atmosphere. Narrow roads that twist up the mountain like serpents, crumbling buildings frozen in time, and a silence that seems to listen. Yet those who linger long enough often encounter something else. Whispers, footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of machines rumbling beneath the earth. Machines that haven't run for nearly a century. Locals say the spirits of dead miners never left. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Jerome was a chaotic mix of prosperity and tragedy. The copper mines ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but safety was minimal and accidents were frequent. Tunnel collapses, explosions, poisonous gas leaks. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of miners lost their lives below ground, their bodies buried beneath rubble, never recovered. One of the most notorious events occurred in 1911, when Shaft 3C of the United Verde mine collapsed after a methane gas explosion. 17 men were trapped. Rescue crews tried for days to dig through, but the tunnel was unstable. Eventually, the efforts were called off. The shaft was sealed, entombing the men forever. It's said that was the moment Jerome became haunted. Tour guides often mention the Connor Hotel, a historic building that stands near the center of town. Room 6 is famous not just for its antique furniture, but for the unexplainable banging sounds that guests report late at night, always at 3:12 a.m., the exact time the explosion at Shaft 3C occurred. Some even claim to hear muffled voices speaking in old miners' slang, or the clink of metal tools hitting stone. Then there's the Douglas Mansion, now a museum, once the home of the mining magnates. Staff there have experienced strange electrical surges, lights flickering, and cold drafts in rooms with no windows. One night in 2002, a night security guard named Ramon Ortiz heard the sound of picks hitting rock echoing from the museum's basement. When he went down to investigate, the sound stopped, and in the dust, he saw fresh footprints. Bare, covered in soot. He quit the next day. But perhaps the most chilling account comes from Maria Teller, a geology student from Phoenix who stayed in Jerome for a summer research project in 2015. She rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town and spent her days hiking the mine trails, taking measurements and photographs. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she heard what she thought was heavy equipment moving, a winch groaning, the squeal of metal cables. Curious, She followed the sound to the abandoned Audrey shaft. The machinery wasn't supposed to be functional. The shaft had been closed since the 1930s. She swore she saw lights flickering below, deep within the darkness, like helmet lamps. Then came the voices, low, rough, tired, speaking Spanish and English, calling each other by names. "Hector, bring the drill. Watch your back." Frozen in place, Maria whispered into the opening, "Hello." The sound stopped instantly. Then, from the shaft came one sentence, whispered but clear. "Get out before it falls again." She ran and didn't stop until she reached the main road. Many believe the spirits of Jerome's miners are trapped, not out of vengeance, but duty. Their work never finished, their deaths unacknowledged. In life, they labored under impossible conditions, often exploited, barely seen. In death, they still haunt the tunnels, machines, and pathways they once knew. Paranormal teams have investigated Jerome for years. Thermal cameras have picked up heat signatures in mines sealed for over 80 years. EMF meters spike without explanation. Audio recorders have captured the sounds of rhythmic knocking. 3 hits, then silence, repeating for hours. When played back, some hear what sounds like breathing in the background. One legend tells of a miner named Luis Carranza, who died during the 1911 explosion, but whose body was never recovered. His wife, Catalina, used to wait at the mine entrance every evening for years, convinced his spirit would return. Locals say her ghost now wanders the upper town, a veil over her face, murmuring the name Luis over and over. A few brave souls have tried to enter the sealed tunnels illegally. One such urban explorer, Kyle McNeil, shared online footage in 2019 showing rusted machinery suddenly activating, wheels turning, chains shaking. The video ends abruptly with Kyle screaming and the camera falling to the ground. He was found unconscious near the mine entrance. He hasn't spoken publicly since. Today, Jerome markets itself as a ghost town with character, attracting tourists with haunted hotel stays and ghost tours. But those who work there full-time, especially after dark, often say the same thing. The ghosts don't care if you believe in them. They were here before you, and they'll be here long after you leave. So if you ever visit Jerome, take in the views, enjoy the history, but be respectful. Don't wander into the old mines. Don't stay out too late near the shafts. And if you hear machines clanking or voices murmuring through the night, don't answer back. Some workers never left the job, and in the silence of the mountain, they're still working, still waiting, and maybe still watching. Let's get to part 8 of the story. The Ghost Bus of Phoenix, Arizona. A city drenched in sunlight and modern sprawl. Doesn't seem like the kind of place where ghosts might linger. But for years, there's been a persistent, chilling rumor, passed in whispers by night shift workers, late commuters, and tired students, that a particular bus route holds a terrible secret. They call it the Ghost Bus of Phoenix. It's Route 237, or at least it used to be. Before it was quietly removed from the official schedule, Route 237 ran through the industrial outskirts of the city, past silent warehouses, dimly lit streets, and long stretches of desert. It was a quiet line, mostly used by night workers getting off late shifts. But in the early 2000s, something happened. Something that changed how people spoke about that route forever. On June 4th, 2003, Bus 237 was on its usual night run. The driver, Eleanor Briggs, a seasoned transit worker with a spotless record, was behind the wheel. There were 11 passengers on board. At 11:47 p.m., the bus lost contact with dispatch. 3 minutes later, a semi-truck driver reported a flaming wreck just off the I-17. The bus had swerved inexplicably, smashing through the guardrail and tumbling into a ravine. The impact and fire killed everyone on board. Investigators never found a cause. No mechanical failure. No trace of drugs or alcohol. Eleanor's final log note read only. Picking up one more near Roosevelt. Can't see their face. What unsettled investigators even more was the security footage retrieved from the onboard camera. In the final few frames, blurred and distorted, there appeared to be a 12th figure, seated in the back, unmoving, face turned away from the camera. That person was never identified among the victims. They had no ticket, no ID, no presence on the manifest. After the accident, Route 237 was discontinued, but that didn't stop the stories. Several commuters have claimed they've seen a bus late at night, an old model, silver paint faded, the number 237 flickering faintly above the windshield. It never stops at any official stop, but those brave or unlucky, enough to wave it down, say the doors open slowly, almost reluctantly, and the interior is ice cold, even during Arizona's blazing summers. And inside, things feel wrong. One rider, Daniel Keene, posted on a paranormal forum in 2012. He said he boarded a late bus he hadn't seen before after missing his usual route. There were 5 or 6 passengers seated quietly. Daniel found an open seat, but as he settled in, he felt a cold pressure beside him. Looking over, he saw what he thought was a woman in a long, soot-stained coat. Her face was turned to the window. I blinked, and she was gone, he wrote. But the seat was still warm, and there was a faint smell of smoke. Daniel said he pulled the stop cord and got off immediately. When he looked back, the bus was already disappearing down the road, faster than seemed possible. Another story comes from Monica Alvarez, a university student. She recalled boarding a strange bus after a night class. Everything inside felt slightly outdated, like stepping back a few decades. She noticed no one else on board was using a phone. Everyone sat with their hands in their laps, staring forward. Then, the driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Frightened, Monica asked to get off. The bus stopped without a sound, doors creaking open. She ran. When she turned back, the bus and its passengers had vanished completely, on a street with no intersections. Over the years, Phoenix transit authorities have repeatedly denied the existence of any such vehicle. Route 237 was decommissioned and no longer exists, a spokesperson stated in 2015. There's no current bus that matches those descriptions. But the sightings continue. Paranormal investigators who have staked out old stops along the former 237 route have captured strange phenomena. EMF spikes, unexplained heat fluctuations, and in one case, a garbled recording of what sounds like an elderly woman's voice repeating, "I'm still on board." There's also talk of passengers who've ridden the ghost bus and didn't come back. An amateur ghost hunter named Leo Marquez set up a camera facing Roosevelt and 9th Street, one of the last places Bus 237 was reported before the crash. One night, his camera recorded a bus pulling up at 2:03 a.m. A lone figure boarded. The timestamp confirmed it. Leo went missing the same night. His belongings were found on the sidewalk. The footage remains online, though skeptics call it doctored. Perhaps most disturbing is the story of a former Phoenix mechanic, Harlan Jett, who claims he was asked to inspect a bus that had mysteriously appeared in the maintenance lot one morning. No one saw it arrive. It bore no registration, and its number had been scratched out. Inside, he found charred seats, melted floor panels, and a single, intact journal beneath the driver's seat. The first page read, "They're all still here. I only meant to drive them home." It was signed Eleanor Briggs. Whether urban legend or something more, the ghost bus of Phoenix has earned its place in local lore. If you're walking home late at night, near the old industrial roads where Route 237 once ran, and a quiet bus pulls up next to you, be careful. Look at the destination sign. Listen closely, because if you hear faint whispers or smell smoke, or if the seat beside you feels far too cold, you may have just boarded the last ride of your life. Let's move on to part 9 of the story. The forgotten village of Lost Dutchman State Park. Deep in the heart of the Arizona desert, at the edge of the jagged Superstition Mountains, lies Lost Dutchman State Park, a land drenched in sun, shadow, and myth, known to many for its legendary tales of hidden gold. The park has long drawn fortune seekers, with dreams of unimaginable wealth. But beneath the layers of sand and stone lies something older than the legend, a forgotten village, swallowed by time and whispered about only in hushed tones by those who've dared to search for the Dutchman's treasure and never returned. The legend begins with Jacob Waltz, the lost Dutchman himself. who supposedly discovered a massive vein of gold deep in the superstitions during the 1800s. He died before revealing its location, and since then, hundreds have gone searching for it. Some came back empty-handed. Others never came back at all. But the disappearances are not what make this place truly eerie. Hikers have reported stumbling upon ruins deep within the park, structures not marked on any modern map, stone foundations half buried in sand, a crumbling well, and even the outlines of what seems to have once been a chapel. The strange part, no historical record exists of any permanent settlement in that area. Locals call it the Forgotten Village. According to accounts collected over the decades, those who find this village often return, changed, if they return at all. One such story comes from Caleb Morales, a seasoned hiker and amateur historian. In 2009, Caleb embarked on a solo trip through Lost Dutchman, hoping to trace some of the old miner trails. 3 days into his journey, he radioed his wife in a panic, claiming he'd found something he wasn't supposed to see. The call cut out. Rescue teams found him 2 days later, disoriented and dehydrated, several miles off any known trail. When asked what had happened, Caleb only said, "They're still there watching. They never left." He never hiked again. Caleb later confided in a local journalist that he had stumbled upon a perfectly preserved village, stone huts, a fire pit still warm, and smoke curling lazily into the sky, as though someone had just left. But there were no people, only the sound of wind and a heavy, suffocating presence. He claimed he felt unseen eyes on him the entire time. And then the chanting began. He couldn't describe the language, but said it made his bones ache and his thoughts blur. He ran, but even as he fled, he said he saw shadows standing in doorways, eyes peering from behind curtains, and a figure in a wide-brimmed hat silently watching him from a ridge. He believes the village doesn't always appear, only when it wants to. Other hikers have made similar claims, stumbling upon buildings that shouldn't exist, hearing whispers in a language they don't know, or following flickering lights at night, only to find themselves lost, surrounded by unfamiliar terrain that vanishes when the sun rises. And then there are the stories of those who go searching for the gold. Over the years, at least 24 fortune seekers have vanished within Lost Dutchman State Park, most of them in the same general area, an unmarked stretch of dry ravine east of Siphon Draw Trail. Some say they were lured by dreams of gold. Others speak of visions, a woman in white beckoning them forward, or a strange bell tolling faintly in the distance. One particularly chilling tale involved a man named Eugene Danner, who set out in 1986 with detailed maps and a metal detector. He was an experienced survivalist and had scouted the area for months. 3 weeks later, a park ranger found his camp deserted. His journal remained, its final entry written in shaky, frantic handwriting. Found it. The village is real. They're not dead. They're not alive. They're waiting. He was never found. Modern-day paranormal investigators have set up equipment in Lost Dutchman in hopes of finding evidence. Some have captured strange EMF surges, even in areas with no power lines. Thermal cameras have picked up figures moving among the rocks, only for them to vanish when approached. Audio recordings have picked up unexplained voices, sometimes calling out names, sometimes simply sobbing. There's even an old Navajo legend, predating the Dutchman tale, that speaks of a place in the superstitions where the spirits of those who die with unfinished purpose remain trapped, wandering between this world and the next, unable to find rest. Some believe this forgotten village is that very place, a liminal space caught between dimensions. And the treasure? Some think it never existed, or worse, that it was never meant to be found, that the gold is a trap, a lure, bait. Those who go searching for riches walk unknowingly into the village's grasp, and once you've seen the village, it sees you back. Even today, rangers warn visitors to stay on the marked trails, to avoid hiking alone, and to never follow voices or lights in the distance. But those who are driven by greed or curiosity often don't listen. If you ever visit Lost Dutchman State Park, and you feel the desert grow silent around you, if the wind dies and the sun seems to dim, and if you glimpse a stone village that shouldn't be there, nestled among the red rocks. Don't go in, because some say once you step into that forgotten village, you become part of it, forever. Let's get to part 10 of the story. The ghostly woman of the old church in Tucson, in the heart of Tucson, Arizona. Hidden among narrow streets and old adobe buildings, stands a weathered Spanish colonial-era church, a structure that has seen over 2 centuries of desert sun, storms, and whispered prayers. It's no longer in active use, but the building remains a local landmark. Tourists come for its history. Locals avoid it after dark, because there's something inside that never left. They call her La Dama Blanca, the lady in white. Her story has faded over time, but her presence remains. The church is thick. Sun-bleached walls seem to hold in more than just the desert heat. They hold memories, and sometimes, after nightfall, they echo with footsteps that don't belong to the living. The legend begins in the late 1800s, when Tucson was still a frontier town. According to old journals and parish records, the church once hosted a wedding, one that ended in tragedy. A young woman named Isabel Rios, the daughter of a wealthy Spanish rancher, was to be married to a man she didn't love. The match had been arranged by her father, a union of wealth and power. But Isabel was in love with someone else, a poor musician who played guitar in the plaza across from the church. On the day of the wedding, as bells rang through the courtyard and guests filled the pews, Isabel never arrived at the altar. Some said she fled with the guitarist. Others claimed her father discovered the affair and locked her away. But one version, whispered even today by Tucson's oldest families, says she came to the church alone, dressed in her white gown, and threw herself from the bell tower. The priest found her broken body at the foot of the steps. After that day, the church was never the same. Parishioners began to report strange occurrences. Candles extinguished themselves, and books fell from pews. Some said they heard sobbing echoing from the rafters during services. Others swore they'd seen a woman in a white dress standing at the back of the sanctuary, staring blankly ahead, her veil soaked in blood. Mass attendance dropped. The priest requested reassignment, and within 5 years, the church was shuttered. But Isabel remained. To this day, local paranormal groups and thrill-seeking tourists visit the site, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Many do. They describe the same thing. A pale woman in a wedding dress, sometimes standing beneath the old cross, sometimes drifting silently through the nave, and sometimes, most disturbingly, standing in the bell tower, just as she might have moments before her fall. Photographers have captured anomalous figures in long exposure shots, always faint, always veiled. One visitor, a skeptical college student named Riley Donovan, wrote a blog post after her experience in 2018. She described entering the church just before sunset alone. It was quiet, peaceful, but then the temperature dropped. I turned, she wrote, and there she was, not 5 feet away from me. Her face was blurry like smoke. She didn't speak, but I heard something, music, guitar music, faint and sad, like it was coming from beneath the floor. Riley fled the church. She never returned. A retired priest, Father Tomas Aguilar, once shared his own experience during a rare local radio interview. As a young seminarian in the 1950s, he spent one night alone in the church for prayer and meditation. Around midnight, he awoke to the sound of footsteps pacing slowly down the central aisle. I called out, he said. I thought someone had come in, but no one answered. The footsteps kept coming closer, until I could feel breath on the back of my neck. Then silence. I turned, and I saw the veil, just the veil floating. He left the seminary weeks later. The haunting has grown more intense in recent years. Security cameras installed by the city to deter vandals often glitch when pointed at the altar. One camera even caught a full-body apparition on video, a woman standing just inside the doorway before vanishing into nothing. Some visitors report feeling watched, as if someone is standing just behind them, whispering. Others leave with unexplainable bruises or scratches. One woman fainted and, upon waking, claimed she had spoken to a lady who asked if her love was still waiting. No one knows whether Isabel's spirit is trapped by guilt, grief, or something more powerful. Some believe the church itself has become a spiritual echo chamber, amplifying her pain across generations. Others think Isabel is looking for something or someone. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, locals claim to see her most clearly on that night. If you stand quietly in the church courtyard, you may hear the soft strum of a guitar echoing in the wind, followed by the slow creak of wooden stairs and a final, heart-wrenching scream that pierces the silence. But by the time you run inside, no one is there, just the empty pews, and maybe, just maybe, a white rose, freshly wilted, lying at the base of the bell tower. Thank you for watching the whole video.